Good morning, and today starting a new series of meditations. I've given it the title of Facing Evil. Facing Evil, because that is what we have to do. It's our business to overcome the evil one, and to do that we have to face him. But it's also called Facing Evil because we need to recognize his face as well. So for those reasons, it's Facing Evil, and of course there's only one place we could really start, and that's with the story of the serpent in the garden, which is sometimes called the story of Adam and Eve. Before I get started, I want to just point out there are a couple of very common misunderstandings that you will sometimes hear about the story of Adam and Eve. I've heard many people tell me that this is the story of the origin of evil, but it isn't. In fact, evil is fully formed and already at work in this story, waiting for a chance to strike. So, verse 1 of Genesis 3 says this: "Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field that the Lord God had made." Cunning, that's what the word crafty means. He has a cunning plan, like Baldric in the Blackadder stories. Now, funnily enough, it's not always wrong to be cunning. In the book of Proverbs, exactly the same Hebrew word is translated as prudence. It's good to be prudent, but it's bad to be cunning like the snake. The two things have in common this idea of acting shrewdly, acting on an understanding of what is really going on, and having a plan. Thinking ahead more than having a plan. So you think about consequences and possibilities. That's what the shrewd man does, that's what the cunning person does, and that's what the prudent person does. But in this case, this snake is obviously up to no good. So he is crafty, he's cunning in all the wrong ways. Notice that this snake is waiting for his moment to strike. And of course that moment is when God seems to be absent. That's the point of the story. And what is the name of the tree that Adam is warned about? It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Evil is already there to be known, but it's there to be avoided. But if evil didn't exist, there wouldn't be any such tree. And it's not potential evil. And anyway, potential evil is evil in itself. No, evil is alive in the person of the serpent in the garden. Also, this is not the story of how death entered the world. It's based on a misreading of the book of Romans, that idea, that there was no death in the animal or plant kingdoms until Adam. That is simply not true. In fact, this is what God says in chapter 2, verse 15 onwards. "Then the Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and keep it. And the Lord God commanded him, 'You may eat freely from every tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.' And this is the point. 'For in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die.'" You will surely die. That means that Adam should be well aware of what it means to die. And he was, because he was looking after the animals and plants in the garden. He knew what death was. And he was warned that the day he ate the fruit, he would surely die. So it's only the story of how death came to rule human beings, and in particular, not so much death, but sin. Sin rules us, because the sting of death is sin. But if that's the case, what is the story of Adam and Eve really about? Well, I think it does two very important things. Firstly, it's a very deep exploration of how temptation works. Whenever Christians get together to talk about resisting temptation, they start talking about Adam and Eve. And that's quite right, because this is the great temptation story of the New Testament, Old Testament. So this is the great temptation story of the Old Testament, and a model for understanding how human beings react under the pressure of temptation. Look at the way the four characters interact. It's utterly realistic once you're used to the idea of a talking snake. The way in which blame is shifted and shared, the way in which what is bad is made to look good. There's an awful lot in this story about temptation. And it's also, I think more importantly, an introduction to the Christian gospel. God is already looking forward to Christ, and this story of the failure of Adam and Eve in the face of evil is also a promise of the success of Christ in defeating evil. God is going to destroy the evil one through one of the children of Adam and Eve. One son of Eve in particular is going to crush the head of the serpent. Jesus is going to do that. Jesus is going to crush evil, and the story of Jesus begins here in Genesis chapter 3. Anyway, I want to move on now just to look at what we can know about the serpent. The first thing we see is that his purpose is destruction. His plan is to destroy Adam and Eve. Now, like a dishonest salesman, he pretends to have their best interests at heart, but what he wants to do is kill them. One of his names is Abaddon, or Apollyon in Greek, which means simply destruction. Destruction pleases the devil. That's what he's here for. That's what he likes. He's also cunning and devious. We've already seen that. He can outsmart human beings quite easily, but of course he can't outsmart God. And the Adam and Eve story introduces us to the fact that he's going to be destroyed himself. The destroyer will be destroyed. Also, we learn that he's one of God's creatures. 3:1 says that he is the most cunning or the most devious of all God's creatures. But he is one of them. But he wants to destroy the creation, which is kind of weird, isn't it? That's why he creeps around and acts in such tricky ways. I think what we're meant to learn here is that the devil is ultimately insane. How can a creature want to destroy creatures when he himself is subject to the Creator? There is something in evil which doesn't make sense. As I say, I think ultimately the devil is insane. And I think in insane people today, sometimes I've seen that same destructive urge. You could ask the question, did he go mad and then become the destroyer? Or did the will to destroy make him mad? Who knows? And who can tell? But there is something mad and illogical about evil. Which takes me on to his legs and his tongue. Verse 14 of Genesis 3, So the Lord God said to the serpent, Because you've done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, atheists like to make fun of this. They say, oh, look how ignorant those Bible writers were with their silly just so stories. Well, I think that this story was never meant to be taken literally. I don't think it was ever intended to do that. I think the Bible writers knew perfectly well that the snake was an animal that didn't need legs. Legs would get in the way of a snake trying to move through the grass. They would seriously mess them up. No, this story is telling us something about Satan. So if you want to look at the evil one and ask, well, what is he like? Well, the answer is he's like a snake. Stealthy. The snake in the grass is an image of evil. Poisonous. That's how such small animals can be dangerous to big animals. They're more dangerous than they appear. This enmity between the woman and her children and the snake, well, mothers do this. In countries where there's lots of poisonous snakes, mothers instill a fear of snakes in their children from a very early age. They are taught to hate them and not tolerate them because they are more dangerous than you might think from their size. So that's why the snake has his legs taken off, is to tell us something about Satan. Also, what about this thing of eating dust? Well, we know that snakes detect the scent of other animals by flicking their tongue out and literally tasting their tongues. But this story again is not meant to be literal. What does the devil live off? What does he have to eat? What does he feed on? He feeds on the result of destruction, which is just dust. It's a meagre life, isn't it? Living off the worst and most unsatisfying food. His life is one of destruction, therefore all he will get to eat is the dust of destruction. What a brilliant image of the evil one. Well, there we are. The name of this series is Facing Evil, and today we've looked at one of the faces of evil, the snake in the story of Adam and Eve. And we're going to have to defeat him. We're going to have to overcome him, as John says in his first letter. And therefore we need to know what we're dealing with. And we need to remember that in the end he is only a creature. He has to use stealth and cunning, and eventually, later on in the Bible, one of us, Jesus, defeats him. So there we are. It's a hopeful thing in the end, isn't it? To know your enemy. Well, I hope that helps, and this is the first of a few looks at the struggle that we Christians, that all human beings really face. Bye for now.